When you think of film photography, what do you think of? If you're anything like me, you'll think of warmth, coziness, and maybe some yellows and oranges. The film stock that I think encompasses all of these factors and characteristics is Kodak Gold 200. When it comes to photography, I always want to capture a feeling of familiarity, comfort, coziness, and having mainly shot digital, I've edited my photos in a way to encompass these feelings. As I'm relatively new to film photography, only shooting it over the last 4 months or so, I've only shot a few film stocks. I've shot Portra 160, which was expired in 2017. I've shot expired Portra 400, which was expired in 2023, and a Portra black and white, which I can't remember what the ISO was because I wasn't intending to shoot it. With not much research and the pure fact that I liked the name, took a stab in the dark at Kodak Gold 200. So throughout this video, I'm going to go over 5 key scenarios that I've used the Kodak Gold 200 film stock for. Some will be good and some maybe not so good, but you can make your own mind up on that. These 5 key scenarios are outdoors with high contrast colours, indoor with low light and long exposure, outdoor with high contrast lighting, indoor low light and possibly some poor shutter speed, and indoor lots of light. So scenario 1 is outdoors with high contrast colour. I was in a setting outdoors where I came across this no swimming sign. The background was quite bright on the day, so there was lots of blues, lots of greens because I was on Dartmoor, and the sign that I was wanting to photograph had a lot of red in it. And I think to nobody's surprise, it held up really, really well. The reds held their own. The greens and the blues were quite natural, but still had a tint of this warmth, and that's why you would buy the film stock in my opinion. With it being ISO 200, the lighting wasn't too bad, because if the ISO was say 4 to 800 plus, I would have to use a higher aperture, because then this would combat the harsher lighting coming through with the higher ISO speeds. Scenario 2 is indoor long exposure with the low light. This is something that I wasn't really sure how it was going to turn out when I actually shot the image, because I haven't shot long exposure with this before. So I used the meter app that I have on my phone. I'd highly recommend getting one if you don't have a light meter, and it worked out pretty well. I would have preferred the image to be slightly darker just for my own personal style, but that's okay. The image turned out really well. There was minimal shakiness and the colours still came through really, really nicely. This is where, depending on how you photograph and what equipment you have, the ISO speed could be slightly irritating, purely for the fact that the ISO is quite low, so indoor darker settings, it doesn't really help you out much because not much light is hitting the film stock. But if you do have a tripod, it's brilliant. And if you know what sort of settings you need through the light meter, what you can get is still some very high quality images. So for me personally, this image is a prime example as to why the Kodak Gold 200 film stock holds up so well in high contrast lighting areas. In the image you can see the highlights are really quite blown out, but the shadows have held up really well. There's a lot of detail throughout the shadows, and the highlights actually complement it with it being blown out. It looks quite dreamy, but it doesn't look too much, and I think that's perfect for this film stock. Scenario 4 is indoor lighting with poor lighting and not a fast enough shutter speed and low enough aperture to combat the low ISO. As we know with photography, it works with three main aspects. You've got your aperture, your ISO and your shutter speed. When one is possibly too low or too high, you have to alter the factors you can control to try and get more light or less light into the camera. With arcades being infamous for their bright lights, neon colours, I found this gimbal machine in the corner with really low light, and there's not much I could have done about that. At the time, I didn't have a tripod. I had my light meter on me and obviously the Kodak Gold 200 film stock loaded. The shutter speed on my camera lens could go to, I think I dropped it down to 1/10 of a second, and the aperture down to f1.7. This was still not enough to counteract the low amounts of light in the scene, and as I didn't have a tripod with me, I couldn't keep the shot stable. Me personally, I am very happy with this shot and I really like it. It's quite suiting to the style of work I do, but if you are wanting sharp images in indoor settings, you are going to have to use a tripod, and sometimes that is a bit more of a pain in the arse because you're not able to carry a tripod all the time with you everywhere you go. So you have to be very picky about what settings you use, or maybe bring in an external little light or something to fill the setting. This is actually one of the only negatives that I have for the Kodak Gold 200, but it is quite minor depending on what sorts of photography you do and how you shoot. So the final scenario, scenario 5, is indoor with lots of light. And what can you expect from this? I wasn't able to get any behind the scenes shots. So this shot was actually taken in a local garden centre, and it has lots of light, lots of colour, and enough light that I could use a fast enough shutter speed. With this setting, having lots of light, and therefore I'm able to be a lot more in control of how I manipulate the settings to get the look that I want. The colours came through beautifully, but still having the Kodak Gold twist to it. And I think this is where the Kodak Gold 200 really does thrive, where there's lots of light, lots of colour, there's lots of things going on. Even in the image, there's quite a lot of highlights and a lot of shadows, and they've held up really well. Yes, I've metered to have the settings correct for these types of scenarios, but the film still has to hold up in its own right to get the colours, to get the highlights, the contrast and the shadows, and I think it's done that really well. So in conclusion, why do I think that the Kodak Gold 200 film stock is good for beginners? For me, the most important thing is you get the desired film look. I don't do any post work to my images. I get them developed at a local film shop and I get them sent to me, and then I post them, I share them, I keep them in the archives, and how I shoot is what I get, and I think that is brilliant, and that's one of the main reasons why I shoot film in the first place. Usage of the film is actually really quite versatile, as we've discussed throughout the video. Like, there are 5 different areas that I've used the film and has shone in 4 out of the 5, and I still like the 5th scenario where there was lower light and I wasn't able to shoot with the tripod. The image still came out really nice with the colours and the highlights. So it's very versatile and it's very well rounded depending on where you shoot and what you want to shoot. And one of the biggest pulls for me is the fact that it's actually relatively cost effective for film nowadays, especially for a brand new film. So the most recent roll that I bought was 36 exposures at £12. So that works out roughly to be around like 30p a shot. Obviously with developing, that'll be much more, but that is the same with any film stock. I am actually open to suggestions for some more film stocks that you guys would like me to try out, and if you do have a suggestion, please leave it in the comments, and if I can get my hands on it and I can afford it, I will definitely try and give it a go. And if you've made it this far into the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and it's one click of a button, and it helps the channel way more than you would ever know. And whilst you're there, follow me on Instagram.